The anesthesiologist was counting backward with me when a nurse rushed into the operating room. Her whisper made his face change completely. I remember the bright surgical lights above me, the cold air on my skin, and how Daniel had kissed my forehead an hour earlier. He promised he'd be right outside waiting. Then everything stopped. Someone said the words that made my heart race. Her insurance was terminated this morning. Terminated. During my surgery. While I was on the table. I wasn't fully under yet, so I heard every word clearly. There's no active coverage on file. I tried to sit up, but wires tugged at my chest. That's impossible, I managed to say. Daniel handled all our benefits. Daniel worked in corporate finance. Daniel had insisted last month that I quit my job because his salary was enough. And now, as they wheeled me back out, I saw him in the hallway. He wasn't shocked or confused. He just looked irritated, like someone had inconvenienced him. The hospital administrator approached us with a tight smile and a clipboard. "Ma'am, your policy was canceled at 9:12 this morning. The request was submitted online from your household account. My name is Sophia Harrison. I'm 46 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a project coordinator at a nonprofit organization. I'd spent 12 years building programs that helped low-income families access healthcare resources. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped hundreds of people navigate insurance systems, understand their coverage, fight denials. And now here I was, canceled mid-surgery by my own husband. I'd met Daniel 15 years ago at a charity fundraiser. He was ambitious, charming, and seemed to genuinely care about my work. We married after 2 years of dating. For a long time it was good. But somewhere along the way, his ambition turned into control. His confidence became arrogance. And I'd been too busy supporting his career to notice when I stopped having one of my own. Now I stared at the administrator's clipboard at those numbers. 9:12 a.m. I was already in pre-op at 9:12. Daniel had driven me here at 7 that morning. He said he was going home to grab coffee and my phone charger. He had my phone. He had all my passwords written in our shared notebook. Daniel squeezed my shoulder and his voice was smooth and confident. "This must be a system error. I'll call HR right now." But something in his tone felt rehearsed. The administrator handed me a printed form. "You'll need to reschedule once coverage is verified." I watched Daniel pull out his phone, already dialing. His face showed concern, but his eyes were calculating. That look he got whenever he thought he was the smartest person in the room. The same look he'd had when he convinced me to quit my job. "My salary is more than enough for both of us," he'd said. "You've worked so hard. You deserve to rest." I believed him. Trusted him completely. I didn't cry. Not then. I just knew something was very wrong. At home that evening, Daniel paced our kitchen making calls. "HR says there's no record of any changes," he told me, shaking his head. "It's obviously a glitch in the system. These things happen with automated renewals." His explanation sounded reasonable. But when I asked to see his phone to check the insurance portal myself, he pulled it away. "I already looked. You're stressed. Let me handle this." That night, after he fell asleep, I crept downstairs and opened my laptop. I tried logging into our insurance account using the password we'd always shared. Access denied. I tried the recovery option. It sent a code to an email address I didn't recognize. Daniel had changed everything. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. And if he'd locked me out of the insurance account, what else had he changed? I sat in the dark kitchen until sunrise, making a list of every account we shared. The hospital billing department called me back 2 days later. The woman's voice was professional but careful. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm showing the cancellation request came through at 9:12 a.m. from IP address 192.168.1. That's your home network." I wrote down every detail she gave me. The timestamp, the IP confirmation, the fact that the request was processed from our home Wi-Fi. I was already at the hospital by then, sitting in pre-op, filling out forms. Daniel was home. Not grabbing coffee. Not running errands. Canceling my health coverage. I asked her to email me everything. When I hung up, I pulled up our bank statements on my laptop. Something had been nagging at me for weeks. Small transfers I couldn't explain. Then I found it. A new account opened 4 months ago. An account in Daniel's name only. Over $40,000 had been moved from our joint savings in small increments. Money I'd helped save. Money that was just gone. When Daniel came home that evening, I was waiting at the kitchen table with the bank statement spread out in front of me. "What's this account?" I asked, keeping my voice level. He barely glanced at the papers. "Investment opportunities. I told you about this." He hadn't. "You're too emotional about money," he said, loosening his tie. "That's why I handle our finances. You don't understand portfolio diversification." Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "We should postpone your surgery indefinitely. It's not urgent. We need to be smart about expenses right now." Not urgent. I'd been on a waiting list for 6 months. My doctor said the condition could worsen, but Daniel was suggesting I just wait. I nodded slowly and gathered the papers. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about something from years ago. Our prenuptial agreement. We'd signed it when Daniel's career was just starting. I went to the filing cabinet and found the document. I read it 3 times. There was a clause about financial abandonment, about medical neglect voiding certain protections. I called the attorney who drafted our prenup. Her name was Miss Claire Bowman, and she remembered our case immediately. "The medical neglect clause was your father's insistence," she explained. "He wanted protection if a spouse ever withheld necessary medical care." I told her everything. The canceled insurance, the timestamp, the hidden accounts. There was a long silence. Canceling a spouse's health insurance during a scheduled surgery could constitute reckless endangerment, she said carefully, especially if there was intent behind it. "You need to document everything." She told me to screenshot every account, every email, every billing notice, to create a timeline with dates and amounts, to keep records somewhere Daniel couldn't access. I spent the next 3 days building a file. I opened a new email account he didn't know about. I photographed documents. I saved everything to a cloud storage he couldn't reach. And I watched him. He seemed relaxed now, confident I'd accepted his explanations. He had no idea I was building a case. Late one night, I heard Daniel on the phone in his office. The door was cracked open, and his voice carried down the hallway. "I'm restructuring liabilities," he said to someone, "minimizing exposure before the review." Review? What review? If they find personal assets entangled, it'll complicate everything. His voice dropped lower. "She doesn't need to know about the audit. It's handled." I stood frozen in the dark hallway. Audit. The word echoed in my mind. Daniel worked as a corporate finance director. He managed millions in company assets. If he was being audited, that meant investigators were looking at his accounts, his decisions, his transactions. And somehow I was part of his strategy. I crept back to bed before he finished the call. My mind raced through the implications. The canceled insurance. The hidden money. The suggestion to postpone surgery. None of this was about medical costs. It was about moving assets, protecting himself, and making sure any debt, any liability landed on me instead. I called our mutual friend Vanessa the next morning. She worked in HR at a different company but knew people at Daniel's firm. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "Is something happening at Daniel's work?" There was a pause. "You didn't hear this from me," she finally said. "But his company is under investigation. Financial misreporting. The SEC is involved." My stomach dropped. Daniel's department is being scrutinized. As a director, he could be personally liable if they find irregularities. She lowered her voice. "Some guys in his position are already moving assets around, restructuring things so they're harder to trace." Suddenly everything made sense. Daniel wasn't just protecting money. He was creating distance between himself and any potential liability. If medical debt appeared in my name, if I had bills piling up, it would look like our finances were separate. It would shield his assets from corporate investigators. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a financial buffer. I thanked Vanessa and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and let the full weight of it settle. I hadn't been the victim of a mistake. I'd been part of a calculated plan. 2 weeks after my canceled surgery, I received a call from the hospital's fraud department. A woman named Angela Pierce introduced herself as the compliance coordinator. "We're reviewing some unusual cancellation patterns," she explained. Your case triggered an internal alert. Same-day cancellations right before scheduled procedures are flagged in our system. She asked me to walk her through what happened. I told her everything. The timeline. The IP address. The fact that my husband had access to the account. We've seen cases of intentional insurance manipulation, Angela said carefully, usually related to asset protection or fraud. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement? I said yes. She scheduled an appointment for the following week. When I hung up, I realized Daniel had made a critical error. He'd assumed the hospital would just reschedule me and move on. He hadn't considered that canceling someone's insurance during surgery might raise red flags. That institutions have systems designed to catch exactly this kind of thing. His arrogance had created a trail he didn't know existed. At home, I changed my strategy completely. I stopped asking questions. I stopped looking upset. When Daniel mentioned the surgery, I told him I decided to postpone it indefinitely. You're right, I said, forcing a smile. It's not urgent. We should be smart about money. Relief washed across his face. Within days, he was transferring more money out of our joint account. Larger amounts this time. He thought I'd given up. Thought I was back to being the compliant wife who didn't ask about finances. But I was doing something he'd forgotten about. Years ago, before I quit my job, I'd done freelance consulting work. Small projects, a few thousand here and there. That money went into a separate account I'd opened for tax purposes. Daniel knew about it once, but he'd long since dismissed it as insignificant. I kept it open. And now, I quietly rerouted the remaining balance to a new account at a different bank. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Completely separate from anything Daniel could access or freeze. While organizing files in Daniel's office, I found a benefits confirmation letter dated 2 days after my canceled surgery. I almost missed it in a stack of junk mail, but the letterhead caught my eye. It was from his company's insurance provider. Your coverage reinstatement is now active, it read. Effective immediately. I checked the details. Daniel had reinstated health insurance. Full coverage. Dental. Vision. Everything. But only for himself. His name was the only one listed. I stared at that letter for a long time. He'd protected his own health while leaving mine canceled. While telling me we needed to be careful about expenses, he'd made sure he was fully covered. I photographed the letter from multiple angles. I saved it to my hidden cloud storage. Then I forwarded it to Ms. Bowman with a simple subject line. Additional evidence. Her response came within an hour. This strengthens your case significantly. Document everything related to his coverage versus yours. I put the letter back exactly where I'd found it. Daniel never knew I'd seen it. Ms. Bowman laid out the legal strategy during our next meeting. We have grounds for financial abuse, she explained, pointing to the timeline I'd built. The insurance cancellation, the hidden accounts, the asset transfers. This shows a pattern of control and endangerment. She pulled up the prenup on her laptop. More importantly, if corporate investigators discover he was deliberately shielding assets using you as a buffer, his position becomes indefensible. She leaned forward. The timing is critical. We need to wait until the company audit reaches its peak. If we move too early, he'll have time to create new explanations. If we wait until findings are public, he'll be cornered. I asked how long. Based on what your friend told you, probably 6 to 8 weeks. These corporate investigations follow predictable timelines. She closed her laptop. In the meantime, keep documenting. Keep acting normal. And prepare yourself. When this breaks, it's going to be intense. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, but clarity. I knew what was coming and I was ready. Daniel came home pale and shaken on a Tuesday evening. He went straight to his office and closed the door. Through the wall, I could hear him on the phone, his voice tight with stress. When he finally emerged an hour later, he looked exhausted. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my tone light. Just work stuff, he muttered, pouring himself a drink. Internal review. Standard procedure. But it wasn't standard. Over the next few days, he became increasingly agitated. He snapped at small things. He spent hours on calls behind closed doors. Then one evening, he came to me with a folder of papers. I need you to sign something, he said. It was a financial affidavit. A statement declaring that certain accounts and assets were mine, not his. That we maintained separate finances. That any debts I incurred were my sole responsibility. I read through it slowly while he watched. Every line was designed to create legal distance between us. To make it look like we'd always operated independently. Why do I need to sign this? I asked. For tax purposes, he said quickly. My accountant recommended it. I set the papers down. I need to think about it. His jaw tightened. It's just a formality. Then I can take my time, I said calmly. He didn't push further that night. But I could see the calculation in his eyes. 3 days later, Daniel exploded. I'd still refused to sign the affidavit, and his patience had run out. This is for us, he shouted, slamming his hand on the kitchen counter. If I lose my job, we lose everything. Don't you understand that? I stayed calm. Then help me understand. Why would signing that paper protect us? He started pacing, his words coming faster. The audit at work, it's nothing, but if they find our accounts mixed together, it complicates things. This just simplifies the documentation. And what about my surgery? I asked quietly. He stopped pacing. What about it? Why didn't you include making sure I had insurance for a procedure I medically needed? The silence stretched between us. I could see him trying to formulate an answer, trying to find the right words to explain away what he'd done. But there were no right words. That was a mistake, he finally said. I told you. It wasn't a mistake, Daniel. You logged in at 9:12 that morning. From our home Wi-Fi. While I was already at the hospital. His face changed. The calculation, the confidence, it all drained away. You've been checking, he said slowly. You know more than you've been letting on. I met his eyes. Yes. The corporate investigators subpoenaed our joint financial records 2 weeks later. Daniel received the notification at work and called me immediately, his voice shaking. They're looking at everything, he said. Every account. Every transaction. You need to. He stopped himself. You need to what? I asked. But he'd already hung up. That evening, a courier delivered copies of the subpoena to our house. I read through the dense legal language. They were requesting 5 years of bank statements, asset transfers, insurance records, and any documentation related to financial restructuring. Every move Daniel had made, the hidden account, the transferred funds, the canceled insurance, it was all going to surface. I called Ms. Bowman. They found it, I told her. The corporate investigators are requesting everything. Good, she said. His attempt to minimize exposure just became evidence of intent. Within days, the news came. Daniel's company had placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal investigation. He came home that afternoon looking like a stranger. Pale, defeated, scared. For the first time since this all began, he had no plan. No strategy. No confident explanation. He was simply exposed. The hospital moved next. Angela Pierce called to inform me they were filing a formal complaint regarding Daniel's insurance cancellation. We've reviewed similar cases, she explained. The pattern suggests deliberate manipulation. We're required to report it. It wasn't criminal, not yet. But it was official. And Daniel's name was attached to the inquiry. The state insurance board will investigate, Angela continued. They take these matters seriously. If they find intentional fraud, there could be penalties. License suspensions. Fines. I thanked her and hung up. That evening, Daniel received a letter from the state insurance board. I watched his hands shake as he read it. They're investigating the cancellation, he said quietly. They want documentation. Proof that it was accidental. But there was no proof. Because it hadn't been accidental. I said nothing. Just watched him realize that every decision he'd made to protect himself was now circling back. The hospital complaint. The corporate audit. The subpoenaed records. All of it was converging at once, and he had no way to stop it. Word spread through Daniel's firm quickly. Vanessa called to tell me what she'd heard. People are avoiding him, she said. Nobody wants to be associated with someone under investigation. The colleagues who used to seek his advice now walked past his office. The men who'd admired his confidence suddenly had other priorities. His reputation, the one thing he'd valued above everything, was crumbling. I saw it myself when we ran into one of his coworkers at the grocery store. The man made eye contact, then quickly turned down a different aisle. Daniel stood there, frozen, watching someone he'd known for years literally run away from him. When we got to the car, he just sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. "They think I'm guilty," he whispered. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not anger, not calculation, just fear. "Maybe you should have thought about that," I said quietly, "before you canceled my insurance during surgery." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I think he finally understood. The woman sitting beside him wasn't the same person he'd manipulated. Something had fundamentally changed, and he was only just beginning to realize how much. I used the money from my separate account to purchase independent health insurance. A comprehensive plan. Better coverage than I'd had before. Then I called my doctor's office and rescheduled my surgery. "Would 3 weeks from now work?" the scheduler asked. "Perfect," I said. I didn't tell Daniel. Not that day, not the day before, not the morning of. I simply got up at 6, drove myself to the hospital, and checked in alone. At 9:12 a.m., exactly the same time Daniel had canceled my coverage months earlier, a nurse walked me back to pre-op. This time there were no interruptions, no whispered conversations, no panicked administrators. I signed the consent forms myself, updated my own emergency contacts, listed myself as my primary decision maker. When they wheeled me into the operating room, I wasn't afraid. I was finally taking care of myself on my own terms, without depending on someone who'd proven he couldn't be trusted. The procedure went smoothly. When I woke up in recovery, my phone had 17 missed calls. All from Daniel. I turned it off and let the nurse know I didn't want any visitors. This moment was mine alone. I spent 2 days in the hospital recovering. Quiet days. Peaceful days. No one arguing about bills or insurance coverage. Just nurses checking my vitals and doctors pleased with my progress. On the morning I was discharged, as I was signing release papers, a process server entered my hospital room. "Are you looking for someone?" I asked, though I already knew. "Daniel Harrison," he replied. "He's listed as your emergency contact." I gave him our home address. "Try there." That afternoon, while I was being driven home by a friend, Daniel was served with divorce papers. The petition cited financial misconduct, endangerment, and breach of marital contract. It referenced the prenup clause about medical neglect. It attached evidence, timestamps, IP records, bank statements, insurance documents. Everything I'd been collecting for months. My phone finally powered back on as I walked into my friend's guest room. I wasn't going back to the house yet. 43 missed calls from Daniel. 12 voicemails. Dozens of text messages that started angry and ended desperate. I listened to none of them. I read none of them. I was done responding to his emergencies while he ignored mine. Daniel's company concluded their internal audit 1 week later. The findings were damning. He'd attempted to improperly shield personal assets by creating the appearance of separate finances. He'd made transactions designed to minimize his exposure during a corporate investigation. He'd violated ethics policies and fiduciary responsibilities. The termination letter arrived by courier. No severance package. No retirement benefits. No letter of recommendation. Just immediate dismissal and a strong suggestion that he retain legal counsel. Vanessa called me that evening. "It's all over the office," she said. "Nobody's ever seen someone let go this completely. Usually there's some kind of negotiated exit. But Daniel had burned those bridges. The company's legal team had advised a clean break. Anything else would look like complicity. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. This man I'd built a life with had destroyed everything. His career, our marriage, his reputation, trying to protect himself from consequences that might never have touched him if he'd just been honest. Ms. Bowman called an hour later. "The prenup clause has been triggered," she said. "His actions constitute financial abandonment under the contract. All protections he had are now void." The prenup had been designed to protect the spouse with greater assets. When we'd signed it, that was Daniel. His career was promising. His earning potential seemed unlimited. The agreement protected his future income from claims if we divorced. But there was that clause. The one my father had insisted on. If either spouse committed financial abandonment, defined as deliberately withholding necessary financial support or medical care, the protections were voided, not just weakened, completely eliminated. Ms. Bowman spread the contract across her desk. Because he canceled your insurance during a medical procedure, and because we can prove intent through the corporate audit findings, this clause activates. She pointed to the relevant section. He's now entitled to nothing protected under the agreement. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, it all becomes part of standard marital asset division. Which meant I was entitled to far more than Daniel ever expected. The man who tried to shield his assets by using me as a liability had just lost everything he was trying to protect. He didn't read the fine print, Ms. Bowman said. Or he read it and thought you'd never use it. I thought about him laughing when we signed this contract. So confident. So certain he'd always be the one with power. How wrong he'd been. News of Daniel's dismissal spread through his industry quickly. Corporate finance was a smaller world than people realized. Word traveled. Within 2 weeks, he'd applied to 17 different positions. He got 3 interviews. No offers. I heard about it through Vanessa, who heard it from someone who heard it from someone else. The man who'd once been headhunted, who'd had recruiters calling constantly, couldn't secure a basic interview. His reputation was destroyed. Every potential employer saw the same red flags. Corporate investigation, ethical violations, personal conduct issues. No company wanted that liability. Meanwhile, I was healing. Physically from the surgery, which had been successful. Emotionally from a marriage that had been slowly suffocating me. I'd moved into a small apartment near the hospital. Temporary housing while I figured out next steps. But it was mine. Quiet. Peaceful. Safe. Daniel tried one last time to intimidate me. He showed up at my apartment building demanding to talk. When I refused, he threatened to contest everything in court. You'll get nothing, he shouted through the intercom. I'll fight this until you're buried in legal fees. I pressed the button. My attorney is expecting that. See you in court. The court date arrived 3 months after I'd served him with papers. Daniel showed up with a new lawyer. His third since the divorce filing. The first 2 had quit after reviewing the evidence. His current attorney, a young man fresh out of law school, looked nervous. Ms. Bowman laid everything out methodically. The hospital record showing the 9:12 a.m. cancellation. The IP address proving it came from our home. The corporate audit findings revealing asset manipulation. The insurance reinstatement for Daniel only. The prenup clause. The state insurance board's preliminary findings of deliberate fraud. It took 45 minutes to present. When she finished, the judge looked at Daniel's attorney. Do you have evidence contradicting any of this? The young lawyer glanced at Daniel, then at the stack of documents, then back at the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to request a recess to consider settlement options. Daniel grabbed his lawyer's arm, whispering urgently. But the attorney shook his head. My advice is to settle immediately, he said, loud enough for me to hear. This case is indefensible. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions. Anger, denial, desperation, finally resignation. How much? He asked quietly. Ms. Bowman slid a settlement proposal across the table. His hand shook as he read it. The settlement covered everything I'd asked for. All medical bills from the surgery, including the hospitalization. All legal fees accumulated during the divorce. Half of the marital assets, including the house. And a structured payment plan for the additional damages related to the prenup violation. It was enough to restart my life comfortably. Enough to cover health insurance for years. Enough to never depend on someone else's financial planning again. Daniel signed the papers without speaking. His lawyer witnessed the signature, then quickly left the courthouse. I stayed to finalize some paperwork with Ms. Bowman. When we walked out, Daniel was sitting on the courthouse steps, head in his hands. I walked past him without stopping. 2 weeks later, I moved into a new apartment. A 1-bedroom with large windows that let in morning sunlight. I set up a small home office and started looking at online courses. Maybe I'd finish the degree I'd abandoned when Daniel said his salary was enough. Maybe I'd start consulting again. Maybe I'd do something completely different. For the first time in years I had options. The settlement money sat in an account only I could access. My health insurance was active and paid through the year. My surgery had been successful. I was healing. And I was free. 6 months later, I scheduled a follow-up appointment with my doctor. It was a routine checkup to make sure everything had healed properly. I glanced at the confirmation email and smiled at the timestamp. My appointment was scheduled for 9:12 a.m. I arrived early, checked in at the desk, and handed over my insurance card. The woman scanned it and it came back active. Fully covered. No issues. "You're all set," she said cheerfully. While I waited, I checked my phone. There was a news alert from a legal newsletter I'd subscribed to. Former corporate finance director faces regulatory review for insurance fraud. I clicked the link. Daniel's case had been referred to state regulators. The insurance board's investigation had concluded that his actions constituted deliberate fraud. He was facing fines, potential license suspensions, and ongoing civil liability. The article didn't mention my name, but I knew the story. He'd canceled my insurance to protect himself during a corporate audit, to create distance between his assets and potential liabilities, to use me as a shield while investigators circled. Instead, he'd exposed everything. The hospital had flagged it. Investigators had found the pattern. And the bill he thought would bury me had paid for my freedom. The nurse called my name. I stood, healthy and insured and independent, and walked toward my future. Behind me, 9:12 a.m. would always be a reminder, not of what was taken from me, but of what I'd reclaimed.